Welcome back to Natural AF. I'm your host, Isaac.
And I'm Alexa.
And this show is all about reconnecting with nature, reconnecting with your natural and highest self. And this episode in particular, I really enjoyed because it talks a lot about the connection between your psyche, your emotions, your body, and the conditioning and programming that you can undo with the great Sophie Fletcher, Ph.D.
Yeah, so Sophie's a friend of ours who we know through, I guess, Erasmus and the Here for the Truth podcast initially, but I actually went through one of the rounds of Rise Above the Herd, and that was actually the first round that Sophie joined to do some nervous system work. So I have actually worked with her and done some of this work, and I've had some pretty profound shifts. So I think this is a topic dear to my heart, and I think it's something that everyone needs to know. It just can help you understand your body and how you experience things so much more and be able to heal from any kind of trauma, whether small or large. It's really a really helpful tool to just help you navigate life with more ease. And I guess the ultimate goal, which we talk about in this episode, is to expand your capacity to experience things and step into things that might be a little bit scary at first, or, you know, there might be a little bit of fear around that. It's really to expand your capacity to be able to step into those things and live a more fulfilled life, which is what we're all about here at Natural AF.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really important for men to connect with that side of themselves where they understand that emotions can be felt and held in the body and what to do about it and what happens. I mean, if you go back and listen to the episode that Erasmus and I did, episode 12, you'll understand a little bit about what the results are if you don't do this work, or if you've had trauma, or if you've had emotions trapped in the body and you don't do anything about it.
So before we get into the episode, just quickly, some of you might notice that we have a bit of an upgraded background. So we've done a couple of licks of paint. We got a beautiful artwork from a local market. It's done by a local artist, and it just really encompasses this beautiful environment that we're living in. So we're just upgrading to our Natural AF selves and environments.
Yeah. I've done lime washing in the past. I've never done it successfully over the top of wood, which is why we opted for the paint. But it would be interesting to try sanding and lime washing the other side of it with lime. So if anybody has any ideas about how to do that on bare wood or wood that's been coated with something so that we don't have to use paint, that would be great, because I don't really know how to do that on wood, but I would love to be really natural AF to use only natural coatings and coverings for wood.
I don't even know what lime wash is.
Yeah, I've only been able to successfully do it over stone. Anything that I've put on wood has just come off in like a dusty cloud. So
yeah, well, if anyone knows anything about that, definitely drop us a comment and let us know what you think of the upgrade, because I'm loving it. I can't stop looking at it. I just love it.
Yeah, I do. I really like the way it turned out. And the cool part about whitewashing it as well is you use less than half the paint, probably 2/3 less paint. So you just mix it with water and then do a light patina. Is patina the right word?
I have no idea what that means.
Yes, so it probably is.
So this is the only place where you get to learn about the nervous system and how to whitewash your walls.
Yes. I think we'll do a whole episode on just this whitewashing.
That's not.
No, but as always, this show is sponsored by Natural Art Form. It's the business Alexa and I run, and my lovely daughter over in the States. So we have footprints in Australia and the US, making natural remedies that are simple, pure, and powerful. My goal when I started this was to create a natural pain relief remedy that actually worked, that was powerful and consistent enough to really rely on, because I was doing a lot of home renovation and upgrades to stuff and working so much, couldn't afford to take time off. And I needed something that I could rely on. So that's what I did. Created a product that helped with lowering inflammation while accelerating recovery. And we just keep going forward with that. So
for our listeners, we offer a first-time discount. So using the code NATURALAF10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your first order. Here in Australia, we also have an offer in addition to Alleviate. We also have three scents of natural deodorant. It's a salt cream deodorant. It's magnesium-based, very gentle on the skin and works amazingly. And also our skin repair and sunburn recovery lotion that we've just just updated. It used to be called Repair. It's now called Regenerate. And for anyone that isn't up to date on what's going on with Natural Art Form, join our mailing list. We've just sent out our first newsletter for 2025, and that'll keep you in the loop. We've also got exclusive discounts in the newsletter. So join the mailing list and you can keep in the loop with that too.
Yeah. So if you want to support us in a non-monetary way, you can always like, share, and subscribe to this show. Click the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. So without any more ado-ing, let's get into the episode with Sophie Fletcher, Ph.D.
Dr. Sophie Fletcher holds a master's degree in spiritual psychology, as well as a second master's and Ph.D. in depth psychology with an emphasis in Somatic Studies. Sophie is deeply committed to following the innate wisdom of the body. Her extensive training includes somatic experiencing, the neuroaffective relational method, human design, various bodywork and energetic clearing modalities, gamma breathwork, advanced autonomic nervous system trainings, Germanic new medicine, and relational life therapy. These tools empower her clients to engage with their experiences more consciously, leading to greater self-awareness and growth. Sophie believes that the body holds profound wisdom, communicating through symbols and symptoms that reveal our unconscious selves. Her approach is rooted in attentively listening to these subtle cues, using them as pathways to uncover and integrate the hidden aspects of the self that may be impeding one's growth and well-being. Her practice is anchored in compassion and presence, and her focus remains steadfast on honoring the body's inherent wisdom in order to guide people on a transformative journey of personal empowerment. Thanks so much for being with us, Sophie.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Love seeing you guys again.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Yeah, we've been really looking forward to having you on. And, and I think just preparing for this interview too, I was just sort of reflecting back on the work that I did with you during Rise Above the Herd. I think that was the first round that you joined to do some nervous system work. And yeah, it was even just some of the shifts that I had during that time were really profound and really opened up my eyes to this whole sort of world of nervous system work and nervous system healing.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. I just want to know, I love how you guys say H's. Because Joel always says it too, and it's always like Ph.D.
Yeah.
Like every time I'm like, what? Oh,
that's right. And we say herbs, not herbs.
Yeah. Right. So both my parents are English, so I have like a mix.
Right.
Both. I have weird like 6 random words that I say that are more British than American.
Yeah, right.
They're not like consistent. Like it's just like a funny.
Yeah.
They just there sometimes. So
yeah.
Where were you born? Where are you from originally?
I was born in Pennsylvania. I was born in the States. But then all my family was still in England. And so we would spend a ton of time in England. And then my parents actually met and married in Switzerland. So we had a place there. So I kind of say that I was brought up like the States, England, Switzerland.
Yeah,
but then we also,
fun.
The European mentality of like, you just travel a ton. Like anytime we had like an extra day off school or something, we were on a plane. Like my parents just all the time. I even joke because like they just got back from like, I think it was like a 6 or 7 week trip that they did around like India and Maldives and Abu Dhabi and Turkey. And like, you guys,
they're living the dream.
Sounds like such a fun life though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the grand tour.
We had family in Australia, actually. So.
Oh, really? Wow. Well, we interviewed Leanne Lapinto, and she's got family in Brisbane. I was like, that's like a couple of hours from where we are. It's such a small world.
That's so cool. Yeah. We all come, right?
Yeah. Well, and we want to delve a little deeper into your journey. So we always like to open it up and sort of give you the floor and just for you to share, your, some of the most significant life experiences that you've had that have kind of shaped who you are and where you are today and the work that you do with people.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the main things was I was born actually really ill. I had like something called pyloric stenosis. So when I would eat, nothing would stay in my body. And my mom, being my mom, like they were very like allopathic, very Western medicine, very pharmaceuticals and all of that, but it wasn't working. Like this was like a new thing that the doctors didn't know what to do with. They had no idea what was happening. And so at first they were like, well, just, have her on as little calories as possible, no fat at all. Like it was basically Pedialyte or whatever. And I was just wasting away. Like I was just losing tons of weight. And, as a mom, my mom just went into like, this isn't working. Like what we're doing isn't working. We need to find something else. And so her being her, a very, very strong woman was like, I will do anything. And so she actually ended up finding like alternative doctors. And they were like, well, we don't know what's happening either, but that's not working. So let's just do the opposite. And so my mom jokes that they were blending up McDonald's cheeseburgers is what they were doing. Because basically they were like, let's get as many calories and as much fat as possible into her system, and hopefully they'll like weigh down. And it worked. So I was healed by McDonald's, to be
That's hilarious. There is a purpose for everything. Yeah.
I think that like in the 1980s, it wasn't as bad as it is now. So maybe it's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that just kind of like sent me, I think, right away on this alternative healing journey, from the get-go leading with that. And so I've just kind of always been interested in not mainstream stuff, I guess, like anything that would be interesting off the beaten path. And so I ended up in school. I hated school. My parents were told that I was so severely dyslexic that I wasn't going to graduate, high school, let alone college. I think when I was in like first or second grade. And then I found it was just, I learned more kinesthetically. So I just don't learn, like I'm still hopeless with memorization. So please don't give me like math problems or to recite a paragraph that I've had to memorize. But I just I just fell into, I was given Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth when I was a junior in high school. And I swear that saved me in academia. I don't know if I would have graduated high school otherwise, because it was so brutal for me. But I fell in love with Joseph Campbell. I was like, cool, I'm going to marry him. Life's set. But I found out that he had already passed away and I was heartbroken. And, but he really sent me on this journey of like, oh, there's people who like think differently, like this whole other world of sort of like philosophical, archetypal, psychological thinking. Like I didn't know those were things. Like nobody had given me, books like that. And so I ended up going to college, majored in philosophy with a minor in psychoanalysis, went straight into my first master's for spiritual psychology, thinking, because I was brought up in a spiritual community as well. And part of the spiritual psychology program was sort of part of that organization. And so in my head, I was like, okay, well, University of Santa Monica for spiritual psychology, that's going to give me all the answers that I need for life. And I'm going to come out of it and I'm going to be, completely healed and happy and have my path and all of the things. Because a sidebar of that is that I became like severely depressed around age 3-4. And that just continued through my whole life until mid-20s. But so I went to this grad school thinking like, this is the answer. This is what's going to, cure me. And then I graduated on my 2 days before my 24th birthday or something, and was still severely depressed. And I was like, well, what on earth? Like, what now? And realized that all of my training, all of this work that I do really love and still really use a lot of in my practice, but it didn't have any grounding. So all of it was really focused on like, how do you transcend the body? How do you release the body? How do you, just meditate your way through everything? And so it really wasn't getting to like, it was all lived experience for me. And so I graduated and ended up getting tricked into going to see this body worker who walks on people's bodies. And I was like, the first session, I was like, what on earth? Like, I have so much pain in my body. I was in excruciating pain from this work. And then that really shifted me into like, oh, it's like about being embodied. It's like my whole focus went into like, oh, it's about like, how can I be here? How can I experience life? How can I actually experience this physical reality that I'm in? Not letting go completely of all of my teachings and understandings of like higher power and our soul and consciousness, but like here on the planet. And so then that took me down like the somatics road, and obviously went back to school for depth psychology with an emphasis in somatics. And then that's still just my continuing investigation. I'm assuming it'll be just a lifelong investigation at this point, but who knows?
Yeah.
And I've like just gotten into family constellations, and I became a doula over the summer, and also trained I'm going to start teaching birth education courses. Mainly because I've been working with a lot of mainly women, my clientele, but I see men as well. And I had this massive wave of people who really wanted to work on their traumas around their birthing experiences in the system or even outside the system. All of a sudden I just had like tons of clients really wanting to focus on that. And on the flip side, I had a lot of clients who were wanting to become pregnant. And it just wasn't a world that I had ever really been in. None of my trainings really focused on that at all. And so it just kind of felt like the next calling. And because I don't work with kids, I only work with adults. I was like, oh, well, this could be a way to kind of like, if we get the moms like supported and feeling more capacity and feeling more regulation within their systems, then that's going to support the babies and the new people coming in. And so then we can just go there. Like, I don't want to work specifically with babies, but I can work with the people who will be raising the babies and having most impact on them. And so that's been a really, really fun sort of like shift in my focus recently. Of again, just like, how do we be in our bodies and experience? I mean, I'm not a mom, but just from the videos I've watched and all the research I've done now on it and listening to so many clients talk about it, I mean, just the extreme vulnerability and openness and rawness and intense experience of the physical body to manifest a new being is just like mind-blowing to me. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that's so amazing that you're doing that work, because I actually remember, I think were you on AlphaCast most recently, you and Erasmus? Yeah, listening to that, I remember you mentioning it at the end, and I was like, that's amazing, because I think it's so needed at this time. Like, and again, I'm not a mum either yet, but I've just the things that I've observed, like even just with my sister-in-law when she had her baby. And so the joke was, so when my mom had me, she was in labor for 25 hours and we've never heard the end of it. So when my sister-in-law had her baby, she was in labor for like 40 something hours. And like, she was like, see, like, and there's a joke between them now that like she trumped her. But it's really interesting because the way I see it now, and again, having more of an understanding of the way we experience somatically, it's a fear. Like when you're in a state of fear, everything contracts. And so when you can't relax, these labors go on forever because it's, and yeah, I just know with my sister-in-law, and look, I get it, because I think it's actually way more common with first births. And we were just watching an Instagram video the other day of a woman who free births, and even when she free birthed at home, she said her first was longer than the second. She was shocked at how quickly the second came. And it's because you're going through this completely unknown new experience. So of course there's going to be a little bit of fear or uncertainty, and there's this contraction, and even just understanding that, I think. And so for someone like you to come in and actually have people be in their body during that experience and try to just let go of any fear, or that's so powerful. So that's amazing that you're doing that work now.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's been really cool. So I mean, I was at my my sister-in-law's first birth. She went to a birthing center, and it was 6 years ago. My nephew's now 6. But I remember them sort of joking afterwards, because they kept saying like, "Oh, we want you in the room. We want you in the room." And I was like, I don't really know. Like, I've never been around birth. I don't know. But afterwards we were sort of discussing it, and they were like, well, like, we didn't hire a doula because you were our doula. And I was like, but I don't know what a doula does. Like, I don't know. Like, luckily they didn't tell me beforehand, because I probably would have been much more stressed about it. But I was like, oh, did I do it? Like, what when they were like, yeah, you were what we needed you to be. Because she just wanted somebody there sort of like holding the space, basically. And we even joked, because there was at one point she was having contractions, but they weren't very intense or close together yet, and stuff. And I remember she took my hands and she was like, "This is as bad as it gets, right?" And in my head, even without like, knowing all the stuff that I know now, more just from like, movies and all the dramatic pieces and stuff, I was like, in my head, I was like, oh no, it's definitely going to get way worse. But it's enough still at that point to be like, it's going to be fine. We're going to breathe through it. We're going to be together. Like, you can move through this. It's, all of that. So we joke that I never said what was happening on the inside, where I was like, oh gosh, no.
Well, and I think that's the other thing too, is that, and this is when I started to kind of wake up to all the programming we receive. It's what you most often see in movies, right? Is these horrific births, and they're screaming and they're on their back. Like, what I've learned now is like the way that you see it, like the way that the medical system has you on your back, that's the worst position to be birthing in.
Oh, it's the worst.
It's so unnatural. And so again, it's like when you receive that conditioning, you're already pre-programmed to be like, oh, this is going to be really difficult. And then that's the experience that you have. Yeah.
Well, even, I mean, it's all set up now when you look at the medical system of like, that's so disempowering. Be on your back with your legs up in like a cold, sterile room, and like the complete opposite of how your natural body is supposed to actually through this process.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's a great moneymaker for sure, but but it doesn't really. It's not super conducive to raising the next generation of awesomely, happy, embodied, secure, healthy babies.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think a lot of the fear around it is the pain. That's what a lot of people talk about, and I've heard, which completely flips it on its head, that people can have the opposite. They can have like an orgasmic birth. I've heard it described as. But like, how do you deal with the pain? Like, what is the pain for from your perspective, and how do you go about maybe alchemizing it into something beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pain is really just such a catalyzer for people's lives. I know for myself, like the most of my rite of passages have been really painful at the time, in various, ways. And, I talked a little bit more about the emotional pieces that I've been through. But again, like, even just that first bodywork session where I'm in intense physical pain, I think it's just a marker of a rite of passage. There has to be a large discomfort in the transition that's happening. Like, the woman is literally changing form. She's going from a single person, the maiden, into mother. She's birthing an entire new identity and life. Like, yes, the life of the baby, but her own. Like, she's changing life completely as soon as this is happening. And I think that that's just part of the necessary process of like building that strength, building that capacity within your system. You know, I know a friend of mine who, after birthing, like just burst into tears with like, I just did that. And like the empowering energy that she felt like course through her body of like, I accomplished this, right? Like I actually felt all of that. And I think in our modern world, and I've definitely been susceptible to this, especially in my growing up years of like pain averse, right? Like pain is bad. It means something wrong and bad is happening. It means I'm bad or wrong, or I'm not spiritual enough to be transcending it, or, you know, whatever the story is. And I actually think that, you know, it's sort of a joke in the nervous system world that I have with some friends, because nervous system work is all about how you can actually be with more discomfort. That's really the goal of it, is like, how can you be, well, more to feel like, how much more can you feel? Like, how much more can you have the capacity to experience in your life? But that includes discomfort. That includes being with adversity. That includes being like walking into fear, but knowing that like, oh, I'm capable of doing hard things. Whereas a lot of the sort of new agey, it's still very new, and it's nervous system work and traumatology and stuff is still very, very new. But sort of like more of the pop part of it is like, oh, it needs to be like really contained, and you need people to just feel good all the time. And it's just about being calm, cool, and collected. And it's about, you know, just never having your feathers ruffled, basically. Like that's nervous system regulation. And it's not. I mean, all of the like founders of this kind of work and new research coming out is like, no, that's the opposite. Like growing capacity, growing regulation within your system is actually being able to be with more discomfort, to do harder things through your life. Because I really just don't think life doesn't have to be easy for it to be good.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Like most things that I've done that have ended up being really, really good have been really, really hard at some point.
Exactly.
So
and it is
part of why birth has to be really intense and a really like an overwhelming experience, because, you know, I mean, I've never talked to a snake. I don't know what it's like to shed their skin, but maybe it's uncomfortable. So I kind of think it's the same, like they're literally rebirthing themselves at the same time as their baby.
And it's such a necessary part of life to go through hardship. Like none of us go through life unscathed. And yeah, I think that, again, we've been so conditioned to dissociate from any kind of pain. You know, we're fed alcohol and drugs and TV and movies and junk food and like all these things that we use to just check out and not feel how we're feeling. And yeah, I can relate to you too, because I suffered with depression from around the age of like 13. Again, like through most of my life. At 24 or 25, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, which I now think is a complete load of bullshit, but that's another story for another time. And yeah, I look back now and, you know, and through that, like the depression, I also had anxiety for quite a long time, which through my teenies, I didn't even know, like no one talked about anxiety back then. I didn't even know what that was.
Like thing.
Yeah, that's right. And and I used a lot of things like through my teen years, not so much, but definitely in my late teens, early 20s, I definitely turned to alcohol and drugs. And actually, yeah, through my teen years was probably food. Like I used to binge eat a lot and just eat like really bad foods, which would actually make me feel worse. And we're just so conditioned to do that. And now through the work that I've done, it's actually about going into it. It's actually about meeting it and just being like, well, what's here? Why am I feeling this way? And, you know, at the core of my experience with depression was I was living so out of alignment. And again, because I was conditioned out of who I really was at the core of me. And of course you're going to be depressed and feel out of sorts because you're not living authentically. But unfortunately, again, during those times, like, this stuff wasn't spoken about. We just didn't know. We didn't have this knowledge. So yeah, it's so amazing that it's becoming more popular. But again, you've got to be really discerning about, yeah, because even that more new agey stuff, it's about this bypassing and everything's love and light and we just got to feel good all the time. And that's just not reality.
Well, and even like a lot of like I keep calling it, but like the pop nervous system work and stuff is like, oh, just do this technique to reset your vagus nerve and then you'll be completely fine. Or just do this, you know, like it's sort of taking the same mindset of take a pill for the quick fix, but just sort of like disguising it into this other thing. Yeah. And it's really like what I really like to focus on, as you said, is like, how can you be with what's happening? Like, instead of immediately going to like, oh, if I do, you know, this neck hold and move my eyes, then, you know, my body will yawn and it puts me into this state of my nervous system. It's like, well, could you like sit with it and feel it and see if there's like a natural impulse that comes forward? Is there anything that like happens within your body that you can kind of follow, and then your body will actually do its own thing? Like, we don't have to like keep sort of like reinforcing this, like, oh no, what you're feeling is bad and we need to change it. It's like, no, something's coming up. Let's go with it. Let's follow the body and like what's happening.
Yeah, that's so critical. And that's such an interesting component, or like, I don't know if you would say that's like the center of the whole work, is just noticing what goes on in the body and listening to it, paying attention to it. And for me, I didn't even know before I met Erasmus, your husband, did the body, like the emotions, you could feel them in the body. And it's maybe just because I was oblivious to it, but I was like, that was such a foreign concept. And then when you actually go in and like, just let it, you know, just let it be, just go into it, breathe into it. The resolution seems like it's in the pain sometimes, or it's in the emotion. There's an answer in there for you. It just wants you to notice it.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, I think there's a line in that about my bio or whatever, but it's like, you know, I think our bodies speak in symptoms and symbols. Like, our body doesn't know how to be like, hey, like, like, it doesn't speak in our language, right? It speaks in its language, which is symptoms and symbols through it. And so then for us, it's like, oh, okay, like oftentimes, like when you're having a pain or something's up or something's going on, it's like when you actually like feel into it or sit with it for like 5 seconds, sometimes it's like the body just wanted the attention, right? It just wanted to bring your attention to something to like move itself through. And so, yeah, as I say, nervous system work is just about becoming more and more embodied in terms of, again, you're just experiencing more of what's there, rather than numbing it out, rather than like going in and being like, no, you need to change, or you need to see this, or I'm just going to numb out. I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to do whatever the things are that are your coping strategies. And not necessarily that those are bad, because we need coping strategies in life often. Like, just your system, I would say, like the autonomic nervous system, its only job is safety and survival. So if you're, you know, listening to this podcast, or you guys sitting here, or me sitting here, like, our nervous systems have done their job. So like, gratitude first and foremost, because we're all alive and functioning to some degree. So like, great job. You've survived to this point. And there may just be certain ways of being that your nervous system has kind of like just gotten ingrained into it that maybe need a little tweaking at this point. Or maybe need a little bit more renegotiation through them. But your system hasn't done anything wrong or bad, because it's done its job. Right? Yeah. So But again, yeah, it's getting in tune with like, oh, this stimulus just happened. This was my automatic knee jerk, oftentimes like unconscious reaction. So first and foremost is just feeling that, right? Initial thing, as you said, like, oh, I felt that hit my body, or I felt something happen. And then it's like, as soon as you have that awareness of that, oh, now I actually have the awareness that I could actually have choice around how I'm going to respond or how I'm going to react, versus just, oh, this is how I reacted when I was 3, because these were my certain available, ways of responding at the time. And now I'm 30. So I have different capabilities that my nervous system just doesn't fully understand yet. And so now how do we just like really gently and slowly walk it into like, oh, I'm an adult and I have different capacities and capabilities, and I can take care of myself in certain ways that I couldn't when I was 3. And so I had to do that in order to survive. Right? So,
yeah. And if you could just go into that, so because I did want to get into this today. If you could give an overview of sort of polyvagal theory and the different states of the nervous system, because I think a lot of people will know when you explain the states what they are, but they don't actually have the awareness of that being a nervous system state and sort of how that plays out, and maybe some examples of like why we would go into that state.
Yeah, totally. So, I don't know if people see this or not, but I'll do a little visual with my hands, but hopefully you'll be able to follow with the voice too. But if you think of your autonomic nervous system, so this is coming from Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory. But so he really takes it into the autonomic nervous system as sort of the large umbrella. And then you have 2 separate sort of main states. So one is going to be sympathetic. And one is, I just completely blanked. That was insane. Oh my gosh.
The parasympathetic.
Sympathetic and parasympathetic. That was so funny. I went immediately to ventral, and then I was like, no. I know what I'm talking about. So, so if you think about it, it goes into sympathetic and parasympathetic. And then why it's called poly is that this parasympathetic actually splits into 2 more. So I always kind of think of it as like a little tree, and it's just a little lopsided. But these states are basically our like defensive structures within our system. There's a threat that is sensed, and then it's sort of like, what do I need to do in order to, as I said, survive and find safety? So if you go through it, your first level of defense is going to be sympathetic, meaning fight or flight. And so that's usually a lot of energy comes up in the system. It'll be like a racing heart, maybe some sweating. There may be some like wanting to move or do something. And this is a state where you really, really want access to it, because as I say, it's sort of like, if you're, I think I'm just an example, but like if you're sitting in a park and all of a sudden there's a tiger, 10 feet away from you, you don't want to be like, oh, that's fine. I'm just going to sit here and chill. No, we want our sympathetic to kick in and be like, get me out of here. What do I need to do? I need to run. I need to find a stick. I need to fight. I need to, whatever it is that I need to do. So that's your sympathetic. It's the activation. It's go time. There's a threat response that I need to respond to physically in some way. Now, so that's the one sympathetic side. If we go to the parasympathetic, as I said, the parasympathetic splits into 2 of its own. One is known as the ventral vagal, and one is the dorsal vagal. So ventral vagal, we're going to call it like the social engagement system. So this is where you can be with people, you can look at people's faces, you can read their expressions, you can have conversation, and there's some safety online. So this is like, it's not a threat response, but you're with others. And so it is like, there's a little bit more of a heightened state. But it's really about reading people, being with others, being socially engaged with life in the world. And the other side of it is the dorsal vagal. So the dorsal vagal is our deepest level of defense. So it has been taught at times in terms of like a ladder where you're in ventral vagal, then you drop into sympathetic, and then you drop into dorsal. And dorsal is sort of like, okay, fight and flight didn't work, or there's nothing I can do to fight or fight this. So I'm going to drop into dorsal. And that's really like playing dead, right? So that's the possum. That's one of the main things that I say about this is like, think of it, if you're looking at like a prairie and there's like a herd of antelope that are grazing. And again, you know, a tiger or a lion or whatever, you know, big predator comes into the field. You're going to see all of those antelopes go into sympathetic within their system. They're going, what is that? What do I need to do? Right? Oftentimes they'll start running. So they're in sympathetic, they're flighting away. They're running away. Then if you watch, you know, the nature videos, it's like, oh, lion gets one. And you see the antelope goes down, and it looks dead, right? It looks like, oh my gosh, it's already passed away. The lion won, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, lion gets distracted. What does the antelope do? Most times when you watch these videos, it's like it jumps up and it runs away again, right? So the antelope, as soon as it got caught, it's like, well, its system goes, I can't fight a lion. I have no defense anymore. So what I need to do is flood my system with certain hormones and chemicals that I'm not going to feel the immense pain that's about to happen, right? I need to go into like shut down, collapse. Like, how do I hunker down? And it's actually going to bring a lot of like its blood into its core of like, let me try to conserve whatever I can. Lion gets distracted. It's going to jump back up into sympathetic, right? So now that defense becomes available again. It jumps up and runs off. Hopefully, we'll see. Or it doesn't. But so think of that, like we are animal bodies, right? So our autonomic nervous systems are animal physiology. Our systems are designed to go through all of these stages and to be able to respond to life's experiences with the appropriate level and state that's necessary at the time. What ends up happening a lot of times in people's lives is they get conditioned from very young ages that maybe a certain state isn't acceptable, or another one is the one that like really saves them. And so they can kind of get locked into one of those. So like for me, and even when you were sharing about like the depression, but then the anxiety. Mm-hmm. So when somebody's dealing with depression, but then they have these spikes of anxiety, it's the depression is more of like a dorsal vagal is kind of locked in as like, that's sort of like the main way of coping and surviving. It's just like, I just need to get through, right? Like, as I said, it's that like collapse. It's that like, just I'm trying to be like as small as possible. I'm trying to just like tunnel focus. And then your system jumped into sympathetic for anxiety. Probably because your system was trying to like move through the cycle, but then it gets like, it ends up sort of stalling out and then going like back. And so it's this sort of like back and forth that ends up happening within people's systems. Then there's like blended states in there. So part of that also within your system, as you were talking about the depression and anxiety, would be that freeze state. So freeze is a blended state between high tone dorsal and sympathetic. And what that basically means is that the gas pedal from the sympathetic is on full blast within your system, but the brake is also on full blast, the dorsal within your system, because it feels so unsafe. And so that's when people may have thoughts of like, I need to do this, but I can't. I have to do this, I can't. Like, I have so much to do, but I can't do anything. I'm stuck on the couch, I'm watching 5 hours of Netflix, or I've been scrolling for, an hour, and I have to do all these other things, but my body just can't move. That's when somebody's really stuck in that frozen in between blended state that I'm talking about.
And sorry, Soph, can you just explain quickly, just before we move on, with the dorsal, dorsal ventral, like the full shutdown, what does that most often feel like apart from like depression? But if someone doesn't know they're depressed, but they still might be in that state, what are those, what's that kind of feel like?
Yeah, it feels like nothing. Usually a lot of times it's like a numbness. So it's like if you've been, sitting somewhere and then you get up and like your leg is numb. It's like naturally there would be signals in your body that would be like, hey, move your leg. It's falling asleep. But oftentimes if somebody has more of that dorsal in, it's like that signal doesn't come through. Because there's a general sort of lethargy. There's a general numbness, a general sort of like not really feeling much of anything, right? I mean, that's a lot of what people say around depression, right? It's just sort of like there isn't really anything happening. And think of it like when the antelope is caught, it doesn't want to feel anything. Like that's the whole idea of this survival strategy, is not feeling anything. And so when humans are kind of stuck in that, we're stuck in that, like, it's just like low energy.
And very withdrawn, I've got to say, in my experience, because it's one of the things I notice now, again, just because I have this knowledge. I find when and again, like you said, through doing this work, you just find that you have more capacity. It's not that you never experience all these different states. It's just that you can notice them and, like you said, make a different decision. Like, am I going to get stuck in this? Am I going to feel shit for a day? Or am I just going to feel it and maybe take a step back and do the things I need to do to come into regulation? And that's for me one, because I get, again, with the depression, I was very shut down for a long time. And that was kind of like my go-to. And then when I kind of got better, I found I was then more inactivate, like more in sympathetic most of the time. And then I'd go so long until a point where I just completely shut down, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't go to work, couldn't do anything for maybe a day or two. And so now I sometimes notice when I'm in that shutdown state, not as extreme, I find I'm quite withdrawn, and I find it very difficult to connect with other people. I think that can also be a sign of being in that shutdown state, where it's really hard to even talk to other people or make eye contact with them. It's like very withdrawn.
Yeah, because when we go into that dorsal stage, I'm saying it's like, think of that antelope. Like, what is the mindset, right, of that state of, even though you're not, I mean, hopefully you're not being, attacked by a lion when you're in this state, but it's like our physiology is responding as if. The physiology doesn't know the difference. It just knows there's a massive threat that I don't know how to deal with, that I can't fend off. And so, I'm just going to like really pull in. I'm just going to go really, really, really internal, because I'm getting ready to die, basically, is like sort of like the thought process, if it were there.
What would the effects be if you were to train out of that? Because I feel like this crosses over into my experience in the Army and something that we referred to as stress inoculation. And they would enact, stimulus, heighten your physiology, physically make you like run and pick somebody over your shoulder as if they're dead and carry them. And then you get to a safe spot, put them down, you kind of like readjust your equipment. And then they have these little artillery simulators. They pull a pin on this like grenade thing and they throw it, and it sounds like a bomb. It goes, boom. And then you're under attack again. Then you have to pick them up again and you got to run. And they would just do that over and over and like get you to a point to where at any moment you're just always on guard, but you're kind of relaxed on guard all the time. And there was never that, like, it was beaten out of you basically to never go into that dorsal where you're just like numb. It's like, so what would the effects of being where that isn't available to you, or that you're trained to always like shift out of that?
Yeah. So it's basically like being trained to be in sympathetic at like all times. So generally that's going to be a really heightened system.
Yeah.
Like, as you said, hyper vigilant. Like it's on guard. Like, think of the sympathetic as that antelope that just heard the twig break.
Right.
And so it's going to defensively orient to like, what is that? What do I need to do? And the system's going to go into action mode. So you were just trained to like always be in that mode of like, something's about to happen. What do I need to do? Something's about to happen. I need to act, move, react right now. Yeah. Right. And so oftentimes what will happen with that is there will eventually be some sort of burnout within the system because our physiology is not built to maintain that for crazy long periods of time, right? So then we get, PTSD diagnoses and things like that, which I have a good friend of mine, and she actually wrote her dissertation on this, that I remember her explaining it, where she was like, the D doesn't make sense in PTSD. Like, it's not a disease. It's actually the correct response. Yeah. Like your system should have large reactions to what those kind of institutions put you through, because it's an abnormal situation. Yeah. It is an unhealthy situation to be in. And so your system should respond it should have unhealthy expressions, right? To be like, hey, what is happening? We need to stop this. We need to change something. We need help. Like, what is going on? And so it's actually like, that's a sign of health, if that makes sense, that you would have a large reaction to that kind of situation. Because otherwise it's just like a numbing out, right? So even though the system's in hyper mode, inside there's probably a lot of sort of like numbness, because you're taught not to feel it. You're taught to override all of that. And so that's where we get into this term that's being coined, functional freeze. And I think, even people not in the army, the vast majority of people on the planet, that's what we're dealing with.
I agree.
Is that they've been entrained in some capacity to numb out and to just completely override and to continue, push. Like, a lot of these are like the type A person, or like on the go, always to the next thing. It's this physiology that's like moving, but like, are you there? Like, right. Do they actually feel it? Are they actually aware of what's happening? Or is it literally just that survival instinct of like, just go and like, don't stop, don't look back?
Are there any other states we've missed before we move on? Actually, can we touch on fawn? Because I know that's one that doesn't often get talked about a lot, but I know some people are aware of that. So if you want to explain that, and then any others if we miss them.
Yeah, so fawn isn't actually it's not a physiological state that happens. It's a learned behavior. It's a learned coping strategy of survival. So what happens with fawn is that for various reasons, at some point, most likely in your upbringing, the person who was your primary caregiver, the people who were your primary caregivers, the people that you relied on for life, right? Because we're born as humans, we're born unable to sustain life on our own. We have to be taken care of. There are other animals where that's not the case. They're born and they're like, peace, I'm good. Or they never even meet their parents, like turtles and things like that. Yeah. We are not. So a lot of our coping strategies come from being tiny, tiny little beings who relied solely on others for our survival. And so fawning comes from when that outside survival need was inconsistent. It was unreliable. It didn't feel safe for whatever reasons. And so what ends up happening is all of the focus goes to, how do I make sure that everyone around me and everything around me they're all fine, because that's how I survive. And so all of the focus goes outward. And so again, there's generally like a disconnect from their own bodies, from their own selves, because that wasn't necessary to survive. Does that make sense? That the outside focus, the parent or the primary caregiver being okay, that has to be primary, because that's how I survive. And so, yeah, it comes from upbringing and it's learned over time of like, oh, this is how I survive, is I have to make sure that those around me are okay. And I will say the other thing, there's a blended state as well from sympathetic to ventral, and that's play. Mm-hmm. So you need some stimulus in your system. You need some sympathetic sort of activation, but you also need this social engaged sort of safe feeling to be in this play, creative, like, oh, let's, but have you ever sort of like been playing with a kid and it's sort of like, yay, 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 yay. And then all of a sudden, maybe the voice gets like a little more high pitched, or it goes into like, you just feel like the energy kind of shifts a little bit. Oftentimes that's, they have more sympathetic in their system than ventral now. And so they actually go into a little bit more of like a defensive structure. And then hopefully, it'll come back out. But like if you watch two kids play, right? Like oftentimes it's kind of like always kind of teetering on like, are you playing? Or are you fighting? Are you playing? Or are you fighting? Are you playing? Are you fighting? Isn't that okay?
Especially boys.
Right? Yeah. Totally, right? They're pushing all the limits. But it's like, it's fun to kind of observe that of like, that's the natural physiology of like, you have these two systems on and they're kind of like, they're not perfectly stagnant, and in balance. It's like, they're kind of going like this, and you can kind of hear it in their voice and even in their actions, where you're kind of like, oh, okay, that was a little bit more, that had a little bit more oomph behind it. Okay. Now they're like back into a little bit more chill. And then the other blended state is if it's dorsal and ventral. That's where you get into like really nice, like the meditation happening within the system. Because there is that like a little bit of like, not shut down completely, but calmness, right, within the system from that dorsal, but then also a feeling of like safety and social engagement in the system. And that's where you can get into like those really like juicy aspects. And then there's a whole other part about dorsal of high tone and low tone, but it gets very complicated. But basically,
does this also roll into like brainwave patterns? Like, is that meditative state? Would that be described as theta, or is it a different one?
Yeah, probably. Okay. I actually don't know specifically, but sure.
Yeah,
I've heard theta a lot. I've done different ones, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get into. There's actually two threads I want to pull from here, but first I think we'll go into because it gets thrown around a lot, and I know you and Erasmus touched on it in your episode. That was episode 12. For anyone listening that hasn't heard it, go back and listen to that. They had a great chat. But the word trauma gets thrown around a lot, and
trauma informed.
Yeah, being trauma informed. But I guess I just want to go into, because like all the examples you gave in terms of the states that we go into, they can be considered traumas. But I think it's a very common misconception that to experience trauma, it has to be really severe, like, child abuse or, sexual abuse or like all these really extreme things. But from a nervous system point of view, can you just explain what trauma is and, that it doesn't have to be that extreme?
Yeah. And it's often like the smaller, quote unquote traumas that really impact us the most because they fly under the radar so much. But basically trauma is anything that kind of overwhelms the system. It's something that is too large for the system to really be able to process in the moment that it's happening. And then secondarily, trauma, and this is a little bit more like procedural memory, like body awareness stuff, is generally what happens when something's happening within our system. There may be multiple impulses that we want to do to respond to whatever is happening, but oftentimes we can only do one. And so the ones that we didn't do kind of get like shut down, and they can get really stagnant within the body. And so that can also be trauma within the system because it loses sort of that fluidity. It loses access to certain things. And there's this like push-pull happening within the system. And so again, it is really anything that sort of overwhelms you. So that can be really, really little. That can be something that seems really benign to you intellectually, but for some reason it's stuck in such a way, right? I mean, we all kind of have those memories where it's like someone said something and it seemed like, why did that hit? But it did, right? And so for whatever reason, our system got triggered or got sort of like the confluence of events was like too much for it. Yeah. And of course there's, the bigger things that happen. But oftentimes like there's people who, when they have a bigger thing happen, like a big car accident or something like that, I'll have people who come to, see me to work through that. And then it's like, that opens the door to like everything else in their life because they've never dealt with it or they've never looked at it. They've never felt what those experiences were. And so the car accidents kind of like, it hits them harder because of all of the stuff already there, right? Like their capacity is already strained. And so you put something else in and it's just like, it blows up the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why people don't often recognize the things that they've experienced as a quote unquote trauma because they compare it to others that are more extreme. So they're like, well, I didn't grow up with child abuse. So, what I experienced can't be like, it's not that bad. That wasn't a trauma. But yeah, because I realized that too, like in the last few years, doing this work, some of the things that I had experienced that were still impacting me in adulthood, I never perceived for most of my life, never perceived them as traumatic, but they were, like when I was bullied. And interestingly enough, so I was bullied in my last couple of years or last few years of primary school, which is up until year 6 in Australia. And then I moved into high school and it was by my friend group as well. So it wasn't like bullies that like, these were my friends. And every day I'd go to school and I didn't know what I was going to get. Were they going to be friends with me? Were they not? A lot of shutdown. A lot of that happening. And then I went into high school and that's when my depression started. And I can look back now and see that, but I didn't see that at the time. And I didn't think bullying was traumatic, like most of my life. But looking back now, I'm like, yeah, that was a traumatic experience because like you said, I couldn't cope with what was happening at the time. I couldn't deal with it. And again, I didn't know how to be with that at that age.
And think about it, like, especially that age, like friends sort of take over the precedence, right? Of like the family around like in those formative years. And so in our physiology, being, outside the group or being ousted in some way, think of it like tribes land, right? If you were ousted from the tribe, you most likely died. Right? Like, I mean, that's why everybody had tribes, but it's like our physiology will be responding in that way. So even if you intellectually knew at that age, sort of like, okay, well, this isn't life threatening, your physiology would be responding that way. So it would go into hyperdrive of like, what do I do? Like even the fawning that I was talking about, like, what do I do to like assuage this? How do I make you happier? How do I make this okay? How do I survive on my own? Right. And so oftentimes those are bigger traumas within the system, or they land like bigger traumas because it's survival without the being able to point at it, right? Like a big car accident, people will be like, oh my God, you survived. But like bullying, oftentimes those kinds of things, or even just like in a home being unsafe in any capacity, it's life-threatening to the physiology. And so it lands to, it's overwhelming, right? To the system and harder to process because you can't put your finger on it and be like, well, it was physically threatening. No, it just felt physically threatening.
Yeah. Well, and that's right, because most of our, like that's the difference now. Like a lot of the examples, you hear with the nervous system states are like, you're being attacked by a lion or whatever. Like that was however long ago, so who knows how old the earth is, but that they were the threats. But now it's like, it's just perceived threats. It's more about the perception of what's a threat, which in our day and age isn't about being physically attacked by an animal or someone else or whatever. It's quite often just, the perceived stress of, oh my God, my boss is going to be really angry at me. I could get fired. And then they go into these states of like, because it's related to their survival.
Yeah. And you'll remember this from the thing of like, our physiology oftentimes is responding to our brain as well. So like, if we're thinking about future things, we're like worried about a meeting with a boss or, it's like our physiology is responding as though there's a tiger in the room with us.
Yeah.
So all of this is like, how do we get more present to, again, experiencing what's happening in our body so that I can get that signal and get that symptom that my body is sending and be like, oh no, there's not. I can look around and be like, oh no, there's not a tiger in the room with me. Okay. And then my physiology can respond to that. Right. So I may still be worrying about something because, we have these fun prefrontal cortexes, but it's still this like thing that like my physiology can respond to the actual present experience rather than the perception.
Yeah. Does that stem into like the practical methods of how someone were to try to expand their capacity to feel this stuff in the body? Is like looking around you. I've seen you do that as a demonstration where you kind of look and see physically present awareness in the room. I'm safe, but I'm showing myself that I'm safe. What are some other ways to sort of self-regulate like that?
Yeah. So as we were saying, like really feeling into like what is present for you, right? So you want your body to kind of lead what it needs at the time. And so if there's some like sympathetic coming up, it's like, I give examples, but really those things can be used to sort of like to rev the engine to like get you going if maybe this is new for you or uncomfortable in some way, or just to give like options, right? So a lot of times these things are so shut down that people don't know what the options are. And if there's that numbness inside, they don't even they can't feel what an impulse might be. But some things, especially for like the sympathetic charge, feeling into like, is it more your upper body? Is it more your lower body? Like what's happening for you? One of my favorites is like squeezing a towel. And what I've actually shifted now to is that you can use your own forearms. So if you actually grip like just above your own wrist on either side. So this part of the body, because of the way the bones are structured and move, like I can have, Isaac, I could have you, a very strong, much stronger than me man, put all of his force into squeezing my forearm and it won't damage me. So it's one of the safest parts of our body that we can use for this. But so you can hold, like put one hand right above one wrist and the other hand on the other and squeeze as hard as you can. Twisting might be hard with this, but you can really like feel that activation through your arms. Oftentimes when I do that, I naturally and impulsively like sort of like snarl my mouth. So that's a big one that people can do, because when you watch animals, what's generally one of their first communications of like boundary? I don't want you to do something. Oftentimes it's like they'll raise their lip, right? They'll show their teeth. It's sort of this initial aggression that's happening. And so us as animal physiologies oftentimes have just learned through, society not to do that, to kind of hold that in. So I say, try that, like see what happens. Sometimes we can do these things also to just like explore what's available to us in our body. Like the first time I tried doing that with my lips, it was like I couldn't hold it. I would start laughing, or I would just get like really hot and sweaty because it felt so threatening. Like again, with depression, sympathetic feels threatening. or it did to my system. Like that was dangerous. And so I had to be in more of that dorsal shutdown. And so even doing that felt like, oh my God, I'm showing aggression. This is dangerous. Right. And so really do it, as we're talking about expanding capacity, do it within your capacity to start. So anything you're going to be doing, it's the phrase that like annoys everybody, but slow is fast in nervous system. The slower you go, the more distance you're going to go. Like it's really counter, it's very counter Western society, which is like, go, push yourself to the limit. Like, nervous system work is like really go slow, because you want to be, as I said, trauma is going outside of capacity. Most of us don't know our full limits. Like when we're out, because there's some form of freeze within the system. There's some form of numbing out within the system. And so you want to go really, really, really slowly so that you don't re-traumatize yourself. You want to be able to be connected and aware and embodied through any of the exercises you're going to be doing or expressing, because that's repatterning the system, right? So the trauma is not being embodied, not being there, dissociating from it. So the anecdote is being really present with what's happening. If that means that, I'm trying to think of one that like if I could just go, right?
Yeah.
And then just feel into that. Just that. Like feel into it.
You're kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, oh, okay, I didn't die. Cool. All right. Like maybe try again. Feel into it. Maybe try again. Maybe it gets a little louder, right? Or maybe it's a little deeper or something like that. And play with it of like, am I okay? And as soon as like something's like, ooh, that felt really uncomfortable, like pause, feel into that discomfort as we've been talking about, allow that to move through and take a break. Like this isn't like a workout, like you have to do it every day at this time for an hour and blah, blah, blah. No, it's like, okay, 3 seconds was what I could handle today. And maybe tomorrow I'll feel into it, but maybe 3 seconds was enough for me to like be kind of in the ripple effects for like a week, right? Like some people's capacities is like really tightly wound in there. And so we want to be kind of practicing these, but feeling them as much as possible. As I said, that anecdote. So you can squeeze things, you can growl, bare your teeth, you can like stomp your feet. One of the big things, stomping can kind of go a little bit more cathartic. And that's not the intention of these kinds of things, but more like drop your heels. So if you're kind of like sitting or standing, you more just like thump your heels into the ground. Oftentimes that sort of stimulates a lot more of that like flight response that might have been stifled within the system. If that's coming up, like pushing against a wall can be really helpful. Or we were driving somewhere the other day. I think Erasmus will be fine with me sharing this, but he was upset about something that had happened and we were driving. And luckily, we have like a very open communication around all these things. And so I was just kind of looking at him and I was like, just curious, like, would you maybe just like to like grip the steering wheel a little bit harder and just see what that's like? He's driving, so he's not going into a full blown like, session or anything like that. But I could tell there was, this energy coming up in him. And he knows it too, but sometimes it's really helpful to get like a little permission, right? Because he's in the car with me, he doesn't want to scare me, blah blah blah, whatever's happening for him in his awareness. And so he started like gripping it, and then he's like gripping it tighter, and he's squeezing it a little bit, and it was like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then we could both tell that there was just this like massive deactivation within his system, where he was like, okay. Cool. Like we were on our, we ate a dinner with friends. So it was like, let's just like move this through. Like,
I love that.
But it's like, we can do these for ourselves. Right. And as you said, the looking around is called orienting. So that's exploratory orienting, where you can use any of your five senses. You could just tune into like your listening. You could turn into your tactile of like feeling the seat underneath you. Oftentimes I kind of at least start with the visual of like, can you just like look around your space, and it can be really fast, right?
Yeah.
You can also take time and like really look into it and be like, oh, can I actually be with this? Like, can I actually see what's around me? Can I actually like engage with the outside world? And you can also do it internally, right? So you can sit with it and sort of orient to like what's happening within my physiology right now. What's coming forward for me? What do I need to do? What's maybe an impulse that's coming up?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of like with orienting, it's a bit of the building between like the outside and the inside, and sort of like bringing more relationship, right? So that's a little bit more of that ventral online around the social engagement. We're engaging with the outside world, but also seeing if we can like also feel inside at the same time. Because I said a lot of these like trauma responses are one or the other. It's either like full internal, like fully collapsed, or it's like just outside. Like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to stay safe?
Yeah. It's so interesting.
Our relationship.
That reminds me. So it just came to me as you were describing that, and I was picturing, because I'm, from my world, military tactical stuff. It was so common when you're doing marksmanship training, and not marksmanship, but actually going into like, let's say like a shoot house or shooting on the range, and you're doing all these targets. At the end, when you've put your holes in the targets, they teach you to like turn around and look, and like literally you're orienting to your environment. And I was thinking like that's probably a smart tactic. I don't know if it's informed by someone with somatics, but it's kind of pulling you out of that tunnel vision, and you're looking around, you're being aware of your situation, which kind of keeps you from getting too far into the red and black as far as your heart rate and your mental state.
That's cool to know. I didn't know they did that.
There's two schools of thought on it. Some people think it's ridiculous because it's like, what are you looking for? The idea was you're scanning for other people with weapons and threats. But I'm like, it's actually really useful for regulating yourself in that moment, so you don't get too overheated, and then something moves over here and then you just shoot it, and it's like a kid or something. Like, it could be really important for police officers and military people.
I've got to say, when I learned about orienting in the Rise Above the Herd course with you, and I've got to say I still use it sometimes even just when I'm working. Like if I'm sitting and I'm kind of stressed and I've got lots of work to do, sometimes I'll just sit and just like sit back in my chair and just do that and just kind of look around. And it's so simple, but it's just like, what's here right now? Because again, like the stress of work and the stress when we're on our computers and we're so engrossed in that, it's like a whole other world. And it's like this perceived stress that's not really there. It's usually self-imposed. But just being able to sit back and actually look around and be like, we're lucky enough here that we're surrounded by trees and beautiful birds. And so just even looking out the window and just seeing what's going on out there and looking at the birds, and we've got goannas around here and they're out sometimes. So it just kind of just centers you more and just can bring you back. And I think it's really important too, because I think I think a lot of people fall into that trap of like, okay, well, I've got to learn all the nervous system stuff and I've got to know the exercises. And when this happens, I've got to do this exercise and whatever. But it's actually, what I learned, during RATH and actually implementing some of those exercises and stuff, it's actually more about following your impulses.
Yes.
So, but it's good to obviously be aware of what sympathetic looks like and what you need to do to discharge that energy, what shutdown looks like. But it's really about, like, I remember way before RATH, I remember, I can't believe I'm going to share this on the podcast because it's so ridiculous. Like, I remember laughing at myself after, like, I was like a child chucking a tantrum, but this one day, I was probably like PMSing or something, and I was just so I was like in a rage, like can't even remember what over now, in a rage, and I was so angry. And I've never really, I feel like I've always said I'm not really an angry person, and it's probably one of the things I've suppressed more often throughout my life. And I just like,
I started like bashing, like just on my bed or my mattress, just like bashing my mattress. And then I picked up the pillow and I just like screamed into the pillow and like chucked a full tantrum. Like as a grown adult, I was like, what? And then I finished and I was kind of like, what just happened? I was like a child chucking a tantrum. But I felt so much better. Like instantly, as soon as it was done, I felt so much better. Then when I learned all this stuff, I was like, oh, that was my natural impulse, was to just go into this rage. And even though my throat was really sore, just the screaming and like whatever I needed to do to get it out, it calmed me. Like straight after, I was like calm again. And I was like, that's actually not the worst thing to do. But again, we're so conditioned out of that from very young ages, because as a kid chucking a tantrum, what do your parents do? They tell you to stop. They tell you to behave. They tell you to, so you, from a very young age, we're conditioned to like stop those impulses and not follow them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's like with nervous system work, it's really about like, how can you become more attuned to yourself? How can you feel these like nuanced impulses from your system? And then the next part, as you said, of like following that impulse. But like the very, very, very beginning is like, can you just feel it? Like, can you even be aware of it? Because like it, again, we're so numbed out. We're so entrained into just dissociate, just don't even feel it, just don't really be here, or being sympathetic and sort of override. But again, you're not really feeling these like more subtle things that are happening within the physiology of your being. And so, yeah, how can you go back and kind of rewrite, right, what's happening within your system? How can you allow yourself some freedom and some openness to explore what's coming forward or what your body wants to do, to move these energies through us? And yeah, so when you're in sympathetic, you want to kind of meet that energy and move it through your system in some way. Like when you're high sympathetic or just feeling like the sympathetic, that is not the time to like calm down. In terms of like, that's not the time to like meditate. That's not the time to like to take the deep breath and be like, oh, just calm down. Like your system is in fight or flight. So like meet it, like move the energy through your system. We want to get used to like actually like meeting it and be like, what do you need? What do you want? Like, let's do those things. And then for dorsal and more of that shutdown space, you're still meeting it, but you kind of do want to activate a little bit because you're trying to bring in a little bit more of the life force back into you. And as I said, that's really more of like a numb, dissociated feeling, frozen inside kind of thing. And so it's about finding something really, really, really little that you can do. Because that system, again, it's the antelope that's getting ready to die. It is our deepest form of survival. And so everything can feel really intimidating and like really overwhelming. And so being as gentle as possible while bringing just a little bit of something forward, like, hey, you sat up in bed today. Great job. That was amazing. So proud of you. And like really like get into that of like the smallest thing can be a win for the system, because as you start doing that, again, that slow is fast. So the slower you do it, maintaining within your capacity through that dorsal shutdown, it's like you get into like a flow and you can do more and more. But you need to stay within the capacity, because otherwise the system goes into like even deeper shutdown because it already thinks it's an immortal threat, right? Or mortal threat. Sorry, it thinks it's in like mortal threat, and so we don't want to like be like, you're in mortal threat, but like do this entire to-do list. The system's going to be like, no, we're not doing a damn thing if you think that's what's going to happen. So you kind of want to give it like tiny little breadcrumbs. Like literally like you sat up in bed. Great. Okay. Can I put my feet, close to the ground? Oh, okay. I could do that. Like, oh, I stood up. Oh my gosh. I can actually stand up. I didn't die when I stood up. Like you really want to like enforce this into your system, like recognizing like, oh, I'm still here. Oh, I survived and I stood up. I brushed my teeth. I washed my face. Like it doesn't have to be grand things. It can be like these little things when you're in that deep, deep, deep depression of just coaxing yourself little by little out of it.
And again, it's about, because I listened to Sarah Baldwin's podcast. I love her and the work that she does. And you touched on it before about, and even with the work that I do in Psych K and understanding the subconscious mind, it just doesn't function the same way as the conscious mind. So the conscious mind speaks in words. That's because that's kind of how we communicate is from the conscious mind. But the unconscious mind doesn't. It speaks through symbols and imagery and pictures and feelings. And I love what Sarah Baldwin says is that you have to show your nervous system, not tell it. And what you're explaining here is exactly that. It's about using your body to do these little things to show it that it's safe, instead of what most people try and do is talk themselves out of it. And that just doesn't work.
Yeah. They're going to be like, all right, we're going to get up. We're going to do this, blah, 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 blah. And the body's like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm pretty sure you die as soon as you sit up. And so you have to like actually sit up and then be like, oh, I didn't die.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the breath can be a big part of that too. Like even if you're, like, let's say you're lying in bed, because I've had this before where I've reached burnout and I'm like laying there and I'm just like, don't feel like doing anything. I'm just, all this stuff is weighing on me. I have this growing list of stuff I feel to do and the urgency is really, really high, but my motivation to do any of it is very, very low. And so I remember just like laying there and taking deep breaths and just feeling it, just feeling the diaphragm. You know, it's connected to the vagus nerve and it has all these interesting effects on our nervous system when we use it. And just feeling that and really pushing my abdomen out as I breathe in and then letting it fall and maybe breathing all the way out and pushing all the way on the diaphragm and just doing that 4 or 5 times even, you can start to feel your physiology shift quite quickly just by breathing.
Well, especially because so many people are so disconnected from their breath. I used to be a bit like that, like with anxiety. You don't even realize like you're barely breathing, like you're taking such shallow breaths, and even just connecting to the breath can be so powerful.
Well, also think about it. I mean, with the breath, we're talking about survival, right? Like you stop breathing, you don't survive.
Right.
Kind of thing. But we can control our breath. So it's like this weird balance of it's unconsciously kind of our body's just doing it naturally as like an impulse to stay alive. But then we can also interact with it and shift it and change it and just kind of get a barometer of it. Because oftentimes, especially with like, you know, the orienting that you guys, whenever I've led it, it's like oftentimes I'll say, just notice your breath. And you don't need to change it. You don't need to do anything with it, but can you just notice it? Now, oftentimes with the breath, as soon as you say to like notice it, it automatically changes just because of the nature. But that's a way of checking in with yourself organically too, of like, where am I right now? Like, what is my state right now? How is my body responding to life in this exact moment? Because it is, you know, happening unconsciously most of the time. I mean, unless you're the odd people who are like sitting there and being like, breathe in, breathe out.
Yeah, I think that's what Mark Zuckerberg does most of the time. I think he's sitting there and he's just kind of like in, out, blink, in.
Am I in or am I
out? Okay, so I want to also ask, in terms of what happens to our body, because again, like we were talking about, like in, you know, let's say millions of years ago when we were only going into these states when there was actually a physical threat, versus now where lots of people are stuck in these states for long periods of time. And especially when lots of these issues are born from trauma, whether they be minor traumas or major traumas. What happens when we don't follow those impulses, we don't discharge the energy or bring energy in when we're shut down? What happens when we hold that in our body for long periods of time and stay in these states for long periods of time?
Just look at the vast majority of people. If you go out onto a street in any town or city, that's what happens. It's like people's postures get really, really impacted. Their mindset gets really, really impacted. Think of it as like, I kind of think of it as, when we go through all these events, it's sort of like the system kind of gets like tighter and tighter and tighter in on itself of like what it would deem safe and what it would deem as like survivable. And so everything kind of gets more like locked in to itself. And so there's a lot more oftentimes like there's either no sort of like definition at all, and it's really collapsed and kind of just like wet noodle, I think of it as, or it's like really, really rigid. Everything is really, really tight. And so yeah, you can really see it in people's physiology. That's one of the reasons why I really, really love the somatic work, in combination, like the hands-on work, as well as more of like the body focus stuff. And yeah, I mean, people's mindsets get really, really, it all sort of like, happens simultaneously, and they're all interacting with each other.
Because like you said with your experience and with Isaac, when he did his episode with Erasmus, he shared his experience doing the body work. And I think it just shows like we can hold so much of this in our body and be so unaware of it. But then when you do the body work, like the amount of pain that you'll feel, it kind of shows like when you've just been holding and holding and holding and not expressing. And does it lead to chronic illnesses and things like that too, in your view? Yeah.
I think it does. I mean, I think even Germanic New Medicine would agree with that in terms of like you're chronically conflict active. And so there's going to be there's going to be larger symptoms and different experiences that happen in the body. But from a straight nervous system stance, yes, that's what they really have shown from this lens, is that it really is because there's just more stagnation within the system, right? And even if you go back to Chinese meridian theory and stuff like that, it's like anywhere where there's stagnation, there's dis-ease.
Yeah.
In any of our states of being, in our physiology, in our mindset, in our emotions, in all of these things, it's like, just think of like a stagnant lake, right? It's just kind of like festering and it's overgrown and it smells and all of that, versus like a flowing, like babbling creek, right? Like which one do you want to get into? Which one do you want to live in? Right? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what our body is happening with our bodies when we're going through all these things, and just as I say, like numbing out, just like getting through stuff is just like just shutting it down versus like being with the discomfort.
Yeah. And how does medication play into this with the numbing out when they're especially like specifically psychoactive, like psychotic or antipsychotic drugs and antidepressants and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's obviously a really big topic. I am somebody who advocates doing whatever you need for your to get yourself out of a hole. Like if you're really, really deeply in there and you just need something to kind of like jumpstart or something to kind of give you hope, use. But I don't think it's sustainable in terms of it's not curing anything. I mean, even now there's research out there that like depression and all these things are not due to imbalances in the brain. It's not a physical thing that we can go in and chemically alter.
Right.
And so what those drugs are doing is it's further numbing. Right. It's further sort of dampening the capacity within someone's being, because now they're overriding it, or they're just sort of like putting a Band-Aid over something, but that doesn't mean that the wound is actually being treated or healed. And so eventually, if they want to come on this kind of journey, eventually that medication will become sort of it can become a hindrance at some point, but also it hopefully will come obsolete.
Yeah.
But it's also oftentimes a lot of mind, like a lot of sort of like orienting around like you can be safe without it, because a lot of the messaging once people are on it is like this you know, your life depends on this, right? Again, to that survival level. And it is chemically altering stuff that wasn't necessarily the reason why these things were happening. And so now we do have to be very, very, very careful, because it can be threatening, right? With like certain of these drugs, if you come off of it too fast or you're doing things, like it can really, it can create psychotic episodes.
Yeah.
So I'm somebody who advocates for do what you feel like you have to do for yourself. And at the same time, understand that those are not healing.
Right. Yeah. And at some point you may have to liberate yourself from them.
Maybe to like get yourself where you like get yourself in a position where you could maybe do more work. But yeah, I don't think that they are actually healing anything, especially in the long term.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's not a long-term solution. I think, like you said, if it's like that bad. I just started The Body Keeps the Score. I've heard so much about it for so long, and I finally found the audiobooks on Spotify. So if anyone that's on Spotify, it's on there. And I just started. I'm only up to chapter 3. And he talks about, because obviously he worked through the time when those medications just started coming in and they were seeing all these amazing results and getting people out of mental wards and all this stuff. But then quickly he saw that it wasn't solving the problems. And if anything, people were moving away from healing because they were just using that as the crutch and sticking to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the like, you know, the mindset of the age of like this quick pill, this quick fix that's just going to make everything better. And unfortunately, I mean, I wish it were true. It's just not. It's really, really not. And that's being proven a lot through the research on those kinds of things. And at the same time, it can be helpful for, you know, really extreme and hopefully short-term experiences. But yeah, I mean, it can really, I'm really just sort of an advocate of your body knows best. And again, if we get in tune with those impulses, your body will know what to do to move you through whatever you're going through, versus, oh, I need to take something, or I need to do something, or I need to like, I need to alter myself in order for it to be okay. Like there's something wrong with me. There's something malignant happening, versus like, again, your body is speaking if you're in that position, very big symptoms, right? Which means there's very big things happening that have been suppressed within the system. And so I don't think that further suppressing is the answer. I think, you know, titrating things out in very slow incremental ways. But that's my
that sounds reasonable, because it's, you know, the numbing of it, you could almost think of it like if you wrap yourself in bubble wrap and then you start like, you know, walking around and you start bumping into everything because it doesn't matter because you're wearing bubble wrap. And then once you take the bubble wrap off and you're doing that same thing, now you're getting hit and bruised and you're running into people and they're getting pissed off. It's like, you can't really feel your environment. You're not really present in your environment because you've put this chemical bubble wrap around in your brain and all that.
Yeah.
And they're
so
just
think of it like, oh, what?
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of my dissertation research was on touch and the interrelational dynamics of touch, but part of that was just reading a lot about touch in general. And there have been like, you know, certain cases where people have been born without touch receptors.
Wow.
And they don't survive because they literally don't know that something is hurting them.
Wow.
So they can't survive in this world because they're just hurting themselves. Their physical body is getting injured and they don't know.
Yeah.
So think of that even in terms of our emotions and our mental and like all of this, like the energy work and stuff like that. It's like when we numb out, we're sort of deepening that within our system.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just quickly want to touch on, because we love human design here. We talk about it a lot. I do readings now and I'm still learning, and I love human design. And that's what I love about it. You can apply it to so many different aspects of life. So I'm curious, like, how do you apply human design in this kind of work and with the nervous system? Because I understand, like, I know you've said, like, being a projector, I'm also a projector. Like, some days I just need to be horizontal. Like, I just need I just need to relax. And so when you're working with people, like, do you look at their charts and kind of, and also are there aspects of the human design chart, I'm referring more to the centers, whether defined or undefined, that can impact our nervous systems in different ways?
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously the nervous system is run by more of the solar plexus as its, center correlation. And for clients, there's people who I do have their human design and there's people who I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't include it as like, this is mandatory in order to do, more of the somatic experiencing and like all of that kind of work. But I find it really helpful when I do have access to it, because I am going to guide differently. I am going to sort of like pick up on slightly different things in terms of understanding possibly more of their conditioning and where they're more susceptible to pieces that are probably going to hit harder, right? As I'm talking about, like when something feels overwhelming to the system, when someone has like a completely open center, if they have two parents who had that center or even like as projectors, right? So we don't have sacral centers. That's a big part of what makes us projectors. I understand that there's going to be a lot of conditioning around needing to keep up and needing to keep going and to override our own energy levels. So if I'm talking to another and I know it's another projector, I'm going to guide slightly differently than like if I'm talking to a generator who's saying that they're depressed and they have no energy. Okay, I understand that your sacral is being impacted in some way because naturally you should have energy. You should be lit up by something. And so I'm going to focus a little bit more on that, right? So I like it just as like a sort of a general sort of like, it helps me kind of like maneuver through their individuality. Just with a little bit, I call it like, it gives me a little bit of a cheat code for them.
Yeah.
Not even know, right? And even for like decision making, like that's one of the big ones that I like to know for clients, because oftentimes people have a lot of stuff around decision making. For the solar plexus, I mean, as you know, it's sort of like 50% of the population, about 50%, 51% of the population is emotionally defined, 49 to 50% are not. And that's sort of where we're at in this time from a human design perspective, in a massive shift that's happening. Like there's a massive mutation happening within that exact center coming up to 2027 and beyond. And I mean, if we look around, we live in a very, very emotionally immature time. And a lot of that is just this numbing out, right? Because it feels too overwhelming or it's too much. For the people who are not emotionally defined, they're sort of overwhelmed and taking in too much because they're being bombarded by the emotional centers around them that aren't being honest and aren't really owning what's happening for them. And then the emotional defined people have all been entrained into like, I'm fine, everything's cool, whatever, everything's good and groovy, and like inside are like boiling or like, having all these experiences. And so we're just kind of in this like crazy like mishmash. And so that is one of the centers that I really like to know about somebody chart when I'm working with someone. Again, I don't always get people's charts. Some people just aren't really into it. However, that really helps me because I'm going to language it differently around, like, if you're open in that center, asking your body pretty consistently, like, is this mine when you have big emotions? Because it doesn't mean you don't have emotions, but I always say the key is like all of a sudden or out of nowhere, I got really angry. And it's like, yeah, because that's a signal that it's not actually yours. That's a signal that they are amplifying an energy that's around them. So that's one where I will generally coach around that of like, is this mine? And then your body kind of responds miraculously to like, oh, it's not, so I can just let it go. Or I can process this much quicker because I'm not holding on to it going like, why am I feeling this way? When it's like, you're not really. So like, just let it go. It's not yours to process, right? And then for the emotionally defined people, like, okay, how can you get really, really honest with your emotions? How can you really like own them in terms of being honest with others around you and yourself of like, hey, I'm on a low today. Like, do you still want to hang out or not? And like, not personal at all, but really like owning like, this is just where I'm at on my wave and I don't have to change it. And there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing bad happening. I'm just in this state right now. And I'm just riding my wave out. And how can we kind of like normalize again, like sort of being just open about that. Like, those are things that happen. And then being in dialogue again of like, nothing's wrong. We're just having it. And then, you know, with that, it's like, then you're going to need to take time to make decisions and all of that. And so how can we build up the self-esteem and the confidence to be able to own, like, I need time. I need to feel into things before I make big decisions. We live in such a society that's like, go, 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 go. You're supposed to have, you know, the instinct and the gut response and blah, 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 blah. And if you're emotional, that's not going to work for you for very long. And so how can we really build that muscle within people with that to recognize like, oh, okay, this is where I'm feeling a little bit more calm around the decision. So now I can make it versus like, I'm in the height of my wave and I just want to say yes to everything, blah, 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 or I'm in the low of the wave, so everything sucks and I don't want to do anything. And kind of over-identifying with that, right? So there's a difference between owning and honesty and over-identifying. Like, I'm owning that, like, I exist, I'm an emotionally defined person. So it's like, I exist on this emotional wave versus like, I exist on an emotional wave. And so I'm at the whim of it and I can't do anything. Like, no, I just have an emotional wave and it's freaking fine. Like, nothing's wrong with me. That's how I was designed. That's how 50% of the population was designed. So if we could just be like more open about it. So in terms of nervous system work, that's a big, big one that I do like to know. And I just think collectively, that's sort of a big area of growth for all of us, societally, also just in terms of, again, that lens of this shift that's happening in human design on the planet.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
All right, my final question. My final question and the $1 million question is, how do we heal our nervous systems in a nutshell?
Slowly, very, very slowly. Slowly with awareness. So gradually building awareness of your own experience and self. So practicing orienting, right? If that rings true for you or something, feeling into like maybe what sense feels the most for you or the most accessible for you. Do you like looking around? Do you like touching instead, or feeling into like what your body's touching? Do you like listening and sort of orienting more auditory? Maybe there's smells that really sort of like get you like present and in the moment. Different tastes, you know, that stimulate things. But for all of this is based in you exploring yourself. So to me, like, healing our nervous system is like, how can you create more safety and connection within your being? And as I said, slowly, slowly, because a lot of times that is threatening. It wasn't safe to feel right? Because it was too overwhelming. So gradually feeling into that, if you want to do that orienting piece, or just feeling into like the seat underneath you, can you feel your feet if they're on the ground or something like that? Like all these subtle things, just start feeling into it and see what happens. Because it's your nervous system, right? Every single nervous system, while we all have the basic physiology and structure, we have all been conditioned and gone through life creating a different way of responding. All of us, every single nervous system is completely unique in terms of like how they're experiencing life. And so how can you just become more in tune with, aware of yours? And then, as I said, then you can start following the impulses. Then you can start sort of listening to the symptoms that are coming up for you. And when I say symptoms, I don't mean only physical, right? It's all of your experience of life. And how are you responding? Do you like how you're responding? Is there maybe a different way to respond if you don't like how you're responding? And all the while having more of that gentleness and compassion that your system has done exactly what it has needed to do if you are listening to this podcast because you are still alive. So like, first and foremost, because oftentimes, it's from that mindset of like, I need to fix this thing and something's wrong. And again, coming from that, like something's malignant, something happened. Versus like, no, something has gone really, really right because you are here. Now let's work with it from there. And so you're going to be just approaching yourself, your system differently from that perspective.
Beautiful.
I'm sure there's a lot more I could say, but yeah,
Oh,
that's the basics, right? That's the basics.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
so
you so much, Soph, for coming on. I love this conversation so much. We've been looking forward to it for so long. So where can people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so I have a website, sophiefletcherphd.com, and that has like a contact section. It's a very simple website, but that's where it's best to contact me. I have Instagram, sophiefletcher.phd. I wouldn't say I'm super active on it, but you can try. Maybe that'll shift, who knows? And yeah, those are the best ways. I co-lead 2 in-person retreats every year in Topanga with a friend of mine if you want to do something like that. And then I'm also available for intensives. I work online as well as in person in Topanga, California, if somebody is around this area.
And are you still doing Rise Above the Herd?
Yeah, and I'm also, I lead 5 nervous system focus calls now in Rise Above the Herd, which is a group coaching program created by Joel Rafidi and Gerasimos, who's my husband. And I just think they created such a cool, very, very, very impactful, course. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. We'll have your links in the show notes for anyone that wants to reach out, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. We're dying to get you and Gerasimos on together, so that'll probably be the next time we see you.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you so much. There's so many useful tips, practical things people can take away from this. So
Great.
Thank you so much for sharing the insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. It was so good to see you guys again. And thanks for thinking of me.
Well, thanks so much for listening, everyone. I hope you got a lot out of that episode. And I can just remember, it's been a few years now, but when I first met Gerasimos, I was in some pretty big ruts. I had some unkempt emotional baggage and things like that I hadn't cleared. So this work that Sophie and Gerasimos do and their program with Joel Rafidi, the Rise Above the Herd, I didn't go through that, but Alexa here did. I took a similar parallel journey with Gerasimos and a few other things, but that was instrumental in breaking those old patterns and habits and helping just having somebody powerful from the outside that really cares to see and give you the tools that you can use to shift yourself away from the patterns that you want to leave behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
and
really
I think,
important.
and I think I love nervous system work so much because it does really relates so much to our psyche and the unconscious, what's going on in the unconscious mind. And that's the work that I do with Psych K. And I think this is just another step into that, and really, I guess, making the connection between mind and body and how it actually manifests physically within our bodies when we're not processing things, when we're not, when we're suppressing emotions and things like that. So yeah, I absolutely love this work. I highly recommend it. I think this is something that should be taught in schools. Like, everyone should know this going through life. And I think it is so important for us to begin that journey, especially for future generations, like we chatted with Sophie about at the beginning. And, when it comes to birthing and bringing up our little ones, I think this work is so, so important. So yeah, if you would like to work with Sophie or join the Rise Above the Herd program, all of the links are in the show notes. I believe they're taking enrollments for Rise Above the Herd now. If not, you can always register your interest. So yeah, definitely check those links out.
Yeah. And begin as soon as possible. Don't wait on this. Don't sit on this. If you feel moved to do something, to make a change, you begin building a very, very healthy neural pathway if you act immediately. And sometimes just reaching out or maybe clicking and finding another episode and listening to Sophie talk about something else is a good way to keep that momentum going. So
And stay tuned for next week's episode. We didn't really plan it this way, but we've kind of got like about a month's worth of episodes that are kind of very geared towards self-healing and all the different ways you can do that. So we spoke about the nervous system today, and next week we're going to have my instructor, Psych K instructor, Rosie Pletzer on.
Yeah.
She's just an absolute angel and just knows Psych K and everything that involves the unconscious mind and how it all plays out just through and through. She lives and breathes it. So super excited to release that episode because we had lots of fun recording that one. And it's just another tool in the tool belt to help you become more embodied, more fulfilled in your life, and move towards the things that you really want in life.
February is self-care, self-love month. There's a lot of talk about Valentine's Day and romance, and it's all directed externally. We both have experiences and believe now very strongly that the best you can be in a relationship is how you treat yourself. If you love yourself and you honor yourself and you take care of yourself, you show up really, really well in a relationship, and you're more loving and compassionate with others when you're loving and compassionate for yourself.
Yeah.
So I like taking that stance in February where if you want to show up good in a relationship, take care of yourself. What is it Jesus said? Love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love yourself, how are you going to love your neighbor? So
I know, and it sounds so cliche, but I think you and I can definitely speak to this, but you see it so often that when people don't love themselves and show themselves love in the way that they show others, it's almost like it's almost impossible to then love someone fully because you're always kind of trying to fill from an empty cup. I believe that, love definitely starts first within, and how you treat yourself and your connection with God and the divine, whatever you want to call it. And then that will then just naturally be emulated in all your relationships, not just your romantic ones.
Yeah, beautifully said. So see you on the next episode.
See you next time, guys. Bye.